Elias Boone never planned to marry, not like this. A rancher with more dust than dollars, he figured his life would be cattle, storms, and silence. Then a pale-skinned stranger rode up his fence line with nothing but a trunk, a crooked smile, and a wild offer. 1 cow in exchange for her hand. Folks laughed when he said yes, figured he was desperate or drunk. But on that wedding night when the lamps burned low and truth pressed in close, Elias learned the woman's price wasn't measured in cattle at all. And what happened inside that clapboard house changed not just his marriage, but the whole valley that watched them. Elias Boone wasn't the type to chase dreams. He came west from Missouri with a busted wagon, a sour mule, and a will to survive. 32 years old, weather-worn before his time, he lived in a one-room shack perched on the edge of the Medicine Bow Range. All he owned could fit inside 2 saddlebags, a shotgun with a dented barrel, 2 shirts patched to the point of surrender, and 4 half-wild cattle that had outsmarted more than one set of neighbors. 4 cattle wasn't a herd. 4 cattle was a joke. He needed at least 5 to register a brand at the county office. The difference between a man who grazed somebody else's stock and a man who ranched for himself. That one missing cow gnawed at him like hunger. Without it, the Boone name ended with him. With it, maybe he'd have a shot at leaving more than boot tracks in the dirt. It was a gray morning in May when she rode in. The wind carried grit sharp enough to slice lips, and Elias had just bent to patch a sagging wire when he spotted the wagon rolling slow down his trail. The mule pulling it looked about ready to quit the world. On the seat sat a woman, young, pale, hair tucked under a bonnet, but not tidy like a preacher's daughter. Dust streaked her face. Behind her, lashed to the wagon bed, was a single battered trunk. She drew up at his fence like she belonged there. "You Elias Boone," she called, voice steady. No flutter, no apology. "I might be," Elias said, squinting under his hat brim. "I hear you need a cow." That stopped him cold. Out here everyone needed a cow, but how did she? She climbed down without waiting for an invitation, skirts catching on the wheel. Up close she was plainer than beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, flint mixed with fire. "My name's Clara," she said, "and I'll give you one." Elias barked a laugh. "You got a cow stuffed in that trunk." "Better," she said. "You get me, you get the cow, but only if you marry me first." Elias studied her like he'd study a storm on the horizon. She didn't fidget, didn't soften her gaze. She meant every word. "You're saying I give you a ring, and I get a cow?" he asked. "Exactly. 1 cow, milk already flowing. She's tied to the back of the wagon. Name's Ben." Sure enough, when Elias looked past the trunk, there she was, a rangy red cow chewing slow like she'd witnessed 100 such bargains before. "Lady," Elias muttered, "that's the strangest dowry I ever heard." Clara shrugged. "Take it or leave it. I need a husband by sundown." She wouldn't say why. He asked twice, and both times she cut him off. "Does it matter?" she said. "You get your brand, I get your name. That's the trade." By dusk, Elias Boone, a man who never gambled, stood in a clapboard church at the edge of town, hat in hand, staring at Clara as the preacher's words tumbled over him like water. Folks packed the pews out of sheer curiosity. A stranger marrying Boone for 1 cow. That was entertainment worth missing supper. When the vows came, Elias's throat tightened. Not out of love, he barely knew the woman, but something in her jaw, clenched tight as a trap, told him she wasn't bluffing. Whatever storm chased her here, she was set on outrunning it with his name. "I do," she said, voice sharp. "Sure, I do," Elias followed, low and steady. And just like that, with the smell of kerosene lamps and hymnals heavy in the air, the deal was sealed. They returned to his shack under a swollen moon. The cow lowed once in protest, as they tied her near the barn. Inside, Clara lit a single lamp. Elias watched her unpack from the battered trunk, a threadbare dress, a pair of shoes with soles worn thin, and a small velvet pouch she kept close to her chest. No laughter now, no crooked smile, just silence thick enough to hear the wind scrape the eaves. Elias cleared his throat. "I'll sleep on the floor." Clara turned, eyes dark, unreadable. "You'll do no such thing. We made a bargain." She stepped closer, slow, deliberate. For a heartbeat, Elias thought she might reach for him, But instead she loosened the pouch string and slid something heavy into her palm. Not jewelry, not coins, a revolver. She set it on the table between them. Metal catching lamp. This, she said quietly, is why I needed a husband. By tomorrow night, men will come looking. And if they find me alone, I'm dead. But if they find Elias Boone standing beside me. She let the sentence hang. Elias stared at the gun, then at her steady hand. He felt the floor tilt beneath him, like stepping off a bluff in the dark. Whatever he'd just married into, it wasn't about cattle. And that's where the real story begins. Because the men Clara feared, they weren't far behind. And the first time Elias Boone saw them ride into town, rifles glinting in the sun, he realized one cow was the cheapest price he'd ever pay for survival. Elias Boone rose before dawn like he always did. Habit. Cows don't wait for the sun. But that morning, with a stranger-turned wife under his roof, and a pistol gleaming on the table, his bones felt heavier than usual. Clara was already up, hair pinned, dress buttoned neat as if she'd slept in armor. She'd stoked the fire, boiled water, and poured coffee black enough to chew. She didn't look at him as she asked, "Do you always work before breakfast?" "Work's what keeps me alive," Elias said. "Then today work twice as hard." She slid the revolver across the table to him. "They'll be coming." Elias pushed it back. "Lady, I've lived by fence and rope, not by iron." Her eyes narrowed. "Then you better learn." By mid-morning, word had spread across the valley. Folks couldn't stop wagging their tongues. Elias Boone, who could barely look a woman in the eye, had snared himself a white stranger for a single cow. At the mercantile, old Mrs. Duffy clucked her tongue. "Mark my words, that woman's running from something. You don't haul a trunk across 2 territories unless the devil's on your tail." The blacksmith spat in the dirt. "Boone's either a fool or braver than we thought." What nobody knew was just how close the storm really was. That evening, Elias tried to pry. They sat by lamplight, her stitching a tear in her only dress, him oiling the revolver he swore he wouldn't use. "You gonna tell me what you dragged into my house?" he asked. Clara didn't look up. "What I dragged in is survival." "Survival from who?" She pulled the needle through cloth slow, steady. "From men who don't forgive. From a name I can't say out loud." Elias leaned back, jaw tight. "If they come here, they'll burn everything I've got. I need to know what's at stake." Her gaze lifted finally, sharp as broken glass. "At stake is whether you die in your bed at 50, or face them with me and maybe see 60. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was enough to chill him deeper than the night air. 6 of them, spread wide like wolves circling a kill. He went inside, quiet but urgent. "They're here." Clara didn't flinch. She reached under her trunk, pulled out a box of cartridges and set them on the table. "Then we keep our bargain." Elias peeked from the window as the riders drew near. Their leader was easy to pick. Broad shoulders, black coat despite the heat, face hidden by a brim so low it cut his eyes to shadow. The others were lean men with hard mouths, rifles slung loose like they'd used them plenty. They didn't stop at the house. They rode straight into town. By afternoon, the whole valley buzzed. The 6 strangers had tethered their horses at the saloon, drank whiskey like water, and asked one question over and over. "Seen a woman, pale, travels with a trunk." Nobody spoke. Curiosity was one thing, betrayal another. But silence in a small town only buys time. Sheriff Dugan, gray-mustached and slow-moving, finally knocked on Elias Boone's door that evening. Clara sat stiff by the fire when he entered. "Boone," Dugan said, tipping his hat. "Those men in town, they're bad news. Say they're looking for a runaway. Didn't give me her name, but..." His eyes slid to Clara. "I reckon I don't need it." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Elias noticed her knuckles white as chalk. "You aim to hand her over?" Dugan asked plainly. Elias stood silent for a long time, then shook his head. "I don't hand over what's mine." Clara's breath caught, so soft only Elias heard it. The sheriff sighed. "Then you best be ready. Those men'll come calling. And Boone, they don't knock." That night, Clara finally cracked. She sat on the edge of Elias's bunk, eyes fixed on the revolver he'd leaned against the wall. "I was married once," she whispered. Elias froze. He was a man who thought women were cattle. Something to be branded, traded, broken. I ran before he killed me. But he'll never stop looking. She looked up, face pale in the lantern light. Those men in town, they ride for him. Elias's gut twisted. He'd thought maybe she was hunted for money or crime. But a husband with a posse. That was worse. That was personal. Why me? Elias asked. Why my name? Because, Clara said, voice trembling now. Men like him don't fear law, but they fear a husband's gun. Even if the husband never wanted me. For a long time neither spoke. Outside, the night wind rattled the shutters, carrying faint echoes of laughter from the saloon down in town. Finally Elias picked up the revolver, weighed it in his calloused hand. I don't know much about marriage, he muttered, but I know a man ought to stand when the wolves circle his door. Clara's eyes softened for the first time since he'd met her. She whispered, then maybe I chose right. At dawn, smoke rose from the valley. One of the ranches east of town was burned. Folks said the riders had torched it just to send a message. By noon they were headed west, toward Boone's land. Neighbors closed shutters, prayed under their breath. The town was content to watch and wait. Elias and Clara had no such luxury. He saddled his horse, checked the chambers of the revolver, and set his jaw. You ready? He asked her. Clara slipped the small velvet pouch around her neck, and nodded. I've been running too long. Time to face it. And that's where part 2 leaves us. 6 armed riders rolling toward Elias Boone's ranch, smoke still hanging in the sky, and a husband and wife who'd only just met about to stake their lives on a single stand. But here's the question. What was in Clara's velvet pouch? The thing she never let out of reach. Because when Elias finally found out, he realized the men hunting her weren't just after a runaway wife. They were after something far deadlier. The sky bled red as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, and Elias Boone could see them now. 6 riders, black silhouettes against the burning glow. They came slow, deliberate, the way wolves stalk a wounded elk, every hoofbeat carried across the dry earth, like a drumbeat of warning. Clara stood at the window, her hand pressed against the glass. They've found me, she whispered. Elias adjusted the revolver at his hip, though the weight still felt foreign. No, Clara, he said, voice low, steady. They've found. Before he stepped outside, Elias pointed at the small velvet pouch Clara always kept near her chest. What's in it? Her hand clutched it tighter. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she untied the string and poured the contents onto the table. Out spilled not coins, not trinkets, but papers, crisp, official looking, stamped with seals. Elias squinted at the words scratched in heavy ink. Land deeds, he muttered. Not just land, Clara said. Her voice quivered now, not from fear but fury. Railroad contracts, mineral rights, proof of a claim my husband stole and I took back. Elias felt his stomach turn. Those men weren't chasing a runaway bride. They were chasing power, enough to own half the valley. And you dragged this here? He asked. I dragged it where no man would think to look, she shot back. Into a stranger's shack at the end of the earth. The riders stopped 50 yards out. Dust swirled around their horse's leg. The leader, the one in the black coat, tipped back his hat, just enough for Elias to see a scar running from temple to jaw. Even, the man called, voice smooth as whiskey. Name's Cutter. I reckon you got something belongs to me. Elias stepped onto the porch, revolver at his side but not raised. Ain't got nothing of yours. Cutter grinned, sharp and humorless. Then you won't mind me checkin'. Behind him, one of the riders let out a laugh. The sound carried ugly as a rattler's rattle. Clara appeared in the doorway, revolver in hand. You'll ride back the way you came, Cutter, or you'll find out what happens when a woman's cornered. For the first time Cutter's smile faltered. His gaze flicked to Elias, then back to her. So it's true, you married Boone. He spat in the dirt. Man, you don't even know the poison you've tied yourself to. Elias raised the revolver now, steadying his hand with both fists. Doesn't matter what she is, she's mine. For a heartbeat the world held still, riders tense in their saddles. Elias braced, Clara's finger white on the trigger. Then Cutter gave a low whistle, and the riders wheeled their horses. Not retreating, circling, they fanned out, forming a noose around the shack. The first shot cracked like thunder. A bullet tore splinters from the porch post inches from Elias's head. "Inside," he shouted, dragging Clara back through the doorway. The walls shook as gunfire erupted, glass shattering, wood splintering. Elias shoved Clara behind the trunk. "Stay low." He fired blind through the window, the kick of the revolver jarring his wrist. A rider yelped outside, hoarse screaming, but more shots followed, peppering the shack. Smoke curled from the kerosene lamp. Clara had knocked over. Elias grabbed it, hurled it out before fire could catch the floorboards. It exploded in the yard, sending one horse rearing. For the first time, chaos cracked their tight formation. Clara crawled to the opposite window, breath sharp, eyes burnt. She raised her revolver with the calm of someone who'd aimed before. She squeezed the trigger once. A rider toppled sideways, boots catching in the stirrup, dragged screaming into the dust. Elias glanced at her in shock. She didn't even flinch. "You've done this before," he muttered, her jaw set hard. "I told you I ran before he killed me, but I didn't run empty-handed." Cutter dismounted, crouching low behind a trough. His voice cut through the gunfire, steady, taunting. "Boone, you don't understand what you're fighting for. That woman ain't salvation. She's damnation. Give me the papers and I'll let you live to see tomorrow." Elias fired back, the bullet sparking off the trough. "Tomorrow ain't worth much if I hand her over to—" Silence followed, broken only by the groan of the wind and the creak of saddle leather. Then Cutter's voice came again, softer, darker. "Then you'll both die for nothing. The shack wouldn't hold forever." Bullets chewed holes in the walls, daylight piercing through like knives. Elias's revolver clicked empty. He scrambled for cartridges, fingers slick with sweat. Clara pulled the pouch tight around her neck. "We can't outgun them. Then we outthink 'em." Elias, his eyes darted to the cow tethered near the barn. Bess, bawling and thrashing at the smell of smoke. "Untie her," he ordered. "What? Trust me." Clara crawled out the back, bullets zipping overhead, and slashed the rope. Bess bolted, crashing straight into the line of circling horses. Chaos erupted. Animals screaming, men shouting, dust and hooves flying. Elias kicked the door open and charged through the smoke, revolver blazing. He wasn't aiming pretty, just hard enough to scat. One rider fell, another bolted. Through the haze, Cutter came at him. No rifle now, just a knife long as a man's hand. He slammed into Elias, driving him into the dirt. The blade flashed. Elias caught Cutter's wrist, muscles straining, steel glinting inches from his throat. Cutter's breath stank of whiskey and blood. "You're fighting for a lie," Cutter snarled. "She's poison. She's mine," Elias growled. With a surge he twisted the knife away, slammed his fist into Cutter's jaw, and sent him sprawling. Before he could rise, Clara stood over them both, revolver cocked, barrel steady on Cutter's chest. For a long moment nobody moved. The dust hung thick, the air buzzing with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. Elias, chest heaving, looked up at Clara. Her hands didn't tremble, her eyes burned. "Do it," Elias rasped, but Clara's finger hovered on the trigger. She had the man who haunted her life, the man who'd sent riders across 2 states to hunt her. One squeeze, and it would all be over, and yet she didn't fire. Instead, she whispered, "Not yet. He's worth more alive." And that's where part 3 ends. Cutter, the scarred devil himself, lying in the dirt under Clara's gun, but spared for reasons Elias can't begin to understand. Why would a woman who's been hunted, beaten and betrayed, choose to keep her enemy breathing? Because what Cutter knew, and what Clara still hadn't told Elias, would drag them both into a war far bigger than one ranch, one valley, or even one marriage. Dust settled heavy as snow over Boone's ranch. The shack looked half-ruined, windows blown out, walls riddled with holes, smoke curling from a bullet-scorched roof beam. Elias leaned against the porch rail, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking his shirt. At his boots lay Cutter, wrists bound with lariat rope, mouth twisted in a mocking grin. The other riders had scattered to the hills, some limping, some dragging wounded, but Elias knew they'd be back. Wolves always regroup. Clara crouched over the trunk, papers clutched tight against her chest. Her revolver never left her hand. "You should have killed him," Elias said flatly, nodding at Cutter. Her eyes flashed. "Dead, he's a martyr. Alive, he's leverage." Cutter laughed low, spitting blood into the dirt. She's clever, Boone. I'll give her that. But clever don't keep you warm when the railroad men come knockin'. Elias frowned. Railroad. Clara stiffened. Shut him up. But Cutter went on, eyes glittering with spite. She didn't tell you? This valley's sitting on the vein that'll make fortunes. Copper, coal, and track rights. Her papers ain't worth one cow. They're worth an empire, and every man with money and a gun is already sniffing for it. Elias's stomach turned. He thought he'd married for a cow. Now he was neck deep in a war for land. By sunrise, word of the gunfight had spread like wildfire. Sheriff Dugan rode out, jaw tight, surveying the bullet holes in Boone's shack. "You've stirred a nest," he muttered. "Half the valley's talking. Some say you're heroes. Others say you've dragged a curse down on all of us." Behind him trailed townsfolk, farmers, ranch wives, hired hands. They stood at the fence line, whispering, pointing. For the first time in years, Elias felt every eye on him. Clara stayed inside, but her silhouette against the torn curtain was enough to keep the whispers burning. That night, with Cutter gagged and tied in the barn, Elias confronted Clara by lamplight. "You've lied since the moment you rode up," he said. "You never wanted a husband. You wanted a shield." Clara's jaw tightened. "I gave you the cow. I gave you the paper. Don't pretend you're just an innocent bystander." "I didn't marry into a war," he shot back. "No," she said, eyes fierce. "You married into survival. That's the only kind of marriage this land allows." Elias stared at her, torn between anger and the strange pull he felt every time she met his gaze. She wasn't just desperate, she was dangerous. And yet, he couldn't walk away. Later, in the barn, Cutter whispered through cracked lips, "Boone, we ain't so different, you and me, both just trying to carve out something in this godforsaken land." Elias tightened the ropes. "Difference is, I don't kill for it." Cutter grinned. "Not yet." His eyes glittered. "She'll use you up, Boone. She's been using men all her life. When she's done, she'll leave you bones in the dirt." The words burrowed under Elias's skin. But when he looked back toward the shack, saw Clara hunched over the table with firelight painting her face, he shook them off. "Save your breath," Elias muttered. "You'll need it." 3 nights later, fresh hoofbeats thundered down the main street of town. These weren't outlaws, they were businessmen in broadcloth coats, polished boots and holsters too clean for honest work. They carried letters with official seals, spoke with the authority of men who'd bought sheriffs before. They asked about a woman, a set of papers, and a rancher fool enough to marry her. By morning everyone in town knew the railroad wasn't coming someday. It was already here, and Clara Boone's stolen papers were the key. The valley split overnight. Some neighbors saw opportunity. "If Boone's sitting on railroad land, we can sell, get rich, move east," they said. Others muttered darkly, "He's brought trouble. Trouble means better to run him out before it spreads." The mercantile shut its doors to Elias. The blacksmith refused to shoe his horse. Only a few stayed loyal, whispering, "Don't give her up. She's fighting men bigger than us all." But loyalty wouldn't stop bullets. That night, Clara finally told the full truth. She sat by the fire, eyes hollow. "The man I married before, his name's Silas Crane. He wasn't just cruel. He was tied to the railroad, their enforcer. He used my dowry to stake the first claims. When I found out, I stole the contracts and ran. I thought if I could keep them hidden, I'd ruin him. Maybe even save the valley." She looked at Elias, voice breaking for the first time. "But I can't fight them alone. I never could." Elias said nothing for a long time. Then he reached across the table, set his calloused hand over her. "You ain't alone anymore." But even as those words left his mouth, trouble struck. At dawn, Elias found the barn door swinging open, ropes cut clean. Cutter was gone, leaving only bloody tracks in the dirt where his wrists had rubbed raw. Clara's face went white. "He's riding straight to Silas." Elias felt the ground tilt under him. Then hell's coming back with him. And that's where part 4 ends. The outlaw freed, the railroad closing in, the valley divided, and Elias Boone tied to a woman whose past is about to drag them all into a war they can't outrun. Because when Cutter returns, and he won't just bring vengeance, he'll bring Silas Crane himself. And that man's shadow was long enough to bury a whole valley. The valley woke one morning to the sound of thunder, not from the sky but from hooves, 40 riders strong, banners of dust rising behind them, and at their head rode Silas Crane. He wasn't a man you mistook, broad-shouldered, black beard shot with grey coat trimmed fine enough for a banker, but worn like armor. His eyes were coal pits, cold, hard, bottomless, and when he reined in before Boone's ranch, he didn't bother with words first. He just stared at the shack riddled with bullet holes, then at Elias Boone standing on the porch with a rifle in his arms. Finally, Silas spoke, voice heavy as an anvil. "Where is she?" Elias's gut clenched, but before he could answer, Clara stepped out beside him. "I'm here," she said. Silas's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. "Wife, you've led me a merry chase. Did you really think you could hide behind a dirt farmer and a few planks of wood?" Clara's voice didn't waver. "You don't own me. You never did. And these papers," she lifted the velvet pouch, "they prove every acre you claim is built on theft." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll take them back over your corpse." By noon the valley had gathered on the ridges. Farmers, ranch hands, townsfolk. Some came out of fear, others out of anger, but all wanted to see what would happen when Elias Boone and Silas Crane finally clashed. Sheriff Dugan rode up slow, hat in hand. "Boone, this many guns, you don't stand a chance." Elias's eyes never left Silas. "Maybe not, but stand-in's what I've got left." Silas raised a gloved hand, halting his riders. "I'll give you a choice, Boone. Hand over the woman and the papers, and I'll let you walk away with your miserable patch of dirt. Refuse, and you'll be nothing but bones for the coyote." Elias felt the eyes of the valley burning into him. He thought of the nights alone, the 4 cattle that weren't enough, the silence of a life too small. Then he thought of Clara, fierce, hunted, unbroken, and how she'd trusted him when she had no one left. He raised his rifle. "Then I guess the coyotes eat good tonight." The first shot cracked like lightning, then the whole world roared. Gunfire thundered across the valley, dirt kicking up, horses screaming. Elias fired from the porch, Clara at his side, both reloading as fast as their hands could work. Neighbors who'd sworn neutrality found themselves dragged in. Some ducked for cover, others, tired of Crane's grip on the valley, drew their own weapons and fired back. The ridge became a battlefield. Through the chaos rode Cutter, scar splitting his face. Grin wild, he cut through the fight like a hawk through sparrows, pistols blazing. "Boone," he shouted, riding straight for the shack. "Told you she'd bleed you dry." Elias's bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. He crashed into the dust, rolled, and came up on one knee, pistol aimed. Before he could fire, Clara's revolver barked. Cutter jerked, staggered, and fell face first into the dirt. For a moment, silence cut the battlefield. Cutter, the shadow that haunted her, was gone, but Silas was still there. He dismounted slow, every step deliberate, rifle discarded, knife gleaming in his hand. "Enough of this," he growled. "You're mine, Clara. Always were." Elias stepped off the porch, rifle gone, only his fists and fury left. Not anymore. They collided in the dust, steel flashing, fists swinging. Silas was stronger, heavier, each blow rattling Elias's bones. But Elias had something Silas never did, something to lose, something to fight for. With a roar, Elias wrestled the knife free, drove his fist into Silas's jaw, and sent the man crashing to his knees. Clara stood over Silas now, revolver leveled at his chest. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. The valley held its breath. Men froze mid-fight, even the horses stilled. She could end it here, one shot, and Silas Crane would never haunt another soul. But in her eyes flickered something deeper, a refusal to let him dictate the terms of her life one moment longer. She lowered the gun. "Prison," she said. "Let him rot in chains. Let the world see the great Silas Crane reduced to nothing." With Silas bound and bleeding, his riders broke. Some fled outright, others dropped their guns. choosing life over loyalty. The tide shifted fast. Neighbors who'd hidden behind fear stepped forward now, rifles raised in defiance of the Crane name. By sundown, the valley was quiet again. Smoke curled from burned wagons. The dead lay where they fell, and Silas Crane sat shackled, spitting curses that carried no weight anymore. Elias stood beside Clara, shoulders heavy but unbowed. The shack was half ruined, the ranch scarred, but for the first time it felt like more than survival. It felt like something worth building. Clara's hand slipped into his, small but steady. "I never meant to drag you into this," she said softly. Elias looked out over the valley, at the neighbors who now nodded to him with something like respect. "You didn't drag me," he said. "I stepped in, and I'd do it again. Now, if you'd been there standing on that ridge, watching the dust settle, you'd have seen more than just a rancher and a runaway wife. You'd have seen two people who had nothing, gamble everything, and come out standing when the smoke cleared. And maybe you'd wonder, like folks still do in the valley, was it luck, was it stubbornness, or was it the start of something bigger than either of them ever dreamed? Because the truth is, Elias Boone never planned to marry a stranger for a single cap. But that marriage born of desperation, sealed in gunfire, changed not just his life, but the fate of the land itself.